Thanks for joining us online. Hope Chapel exists to lead people to experience real life in Jesus for the hope of the world. We pray that as you watch today, you will find both hope for yourself and be compelled to bring hope to the world around you. Now, for more information about the church and ways to get connected, go to visithopechapel.com. We look forward to meeting you soon.
Good morning, church. Pretty good. And for everybody watching online, good morning to you as well. My name is Jake, and I have the privilege of being a pastor here at Hope Chapel. This feels really strange, though, doesn't it? I mean, here we are in a really strange setup where we're walking in, and the vast majority of our church is watching online, and yet many of you have ventured out. And so I want to address a few different groups of people as we get started today. Number one, to everybody in the room, let's give yourselves an applause, just a round of applause. We're so glad you came today. Thank you. You know, we, over the last month, have gone through opening and then having to close again and now reopening again. And I think we're here to stay. And so I just want to say thank you for coming out and joining us for worship today. Such a privilege and an honor. And we do not take for granted every Sunday that we have the opportunity to meet in a room like this and meet collectively, do we? Especially over the last 4 months. So thank you for being here. If you're a first-time guest with us today, we're so glad that you decided to join us for worship. I hope to get to connect with you after the gathering today, and thank you for being here. And then for those who are watching online, you are no less a part of what's going on here. We understand some of you are out of town, visiting family or friends, or just in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. We know that some of you are working on house projects and you are hunkering down your quarantine, doctor's orders, all of that and in between. We're just glad that this morning you decided to tune in and to join us for worship today. We're so thankful for you. And as the church, thank God we have this technology to be able to stay connected. I know over the last several weeks, especially if you're watching online, it feels a little disconnected, and you probably feel that way. It even sounds a bit disingenuous for me to say, we love you, we care about you, because we haven't talked face to face for a while. But I do want you to know that we're so thankful that you're part of this and you're prioritizing this as part of your week. Especially if you're tuning in for the first time, or you're over in Lee Summit or KCK, or Spanish congregation is going on. We're always scattered in different places, but we're especially scattered right now. So thank you for being with us today. Well, we are in the middle of a series that we started last week called What If? And it came out of a conversation that we were having as a group of pastors around the table. We're talking about what the fall plans are gonna look like for the church. And every time we went to make a plan, we had a bunch of what if questions come to the table. Like, what if school's open? What if people can return back to their jobs? What if that store is open? What if there's a new limitation or restriction on what we can and can't do? And it felt incredibly limiting, and we realized this is not a pastor conversation. This is an everybody conversation. It just looks a little bit different from one household to the next. Some of you are asking questions about when you're not gonna be working from home. Others of you hope that you work from home from now until forever. We appreciate and celebrate you as well, and you're gonna go end up on a beach somewhere doing your job. And then others of us are asking the question, dear God, when will the kids ever go back to school? Because we love them, and we love when they go to school and then when they come home. And yet we're also trying to wrestle through all of this, knowing that there are very real people who have passed away from a pandemic, and that there is a very real threat for some, and some of us think that's a real threat, and some of us think it's a lesser threat. But anywhere in between, we know that something has happened over the last 4 months, and it's left us with a lot of questions that lead us to limits. And those limits often turn negative really fast. And so we've been asking the question instead as a church, well, what if some of those what if questions could become positive? What if it turned into a season where God met you in a way he's never met you before? What if it turned into an opportunity to reorient your priorities? What if this turned into the greatest season of your life in the midst of absolute chaos in our culture and society? What if God could still step into the midst of your circumstances? What we realize is that God does want to step into our circumstances, and that there are things that happen when God gets a hold of our lives. He offers us freedom and grace and love and growth and mission, our core values. This is the essence of God stepping in. So we said, what better way for us to look at our core values together than to do so through a series that we're calling What If? What if? I found it really interesting to watch people navigate what was a stay-at-home order, which was basically telling the nation to go to your room for 3 months. And you realize that? That's what we do with teenagers. We say, go to your room, and just like teenagers, some of us complained, some of us whined, some of us got depressed, and others of us, we got really bored. The introverts in the room got really excited about the stay-at-home order. They're like, thank God for stay-at-home order. And yet I was really amused by all of the different images that people were posting that were bored during quarantine. Like this guy who took every box that I think Amazon ever delivered to his house and built a tank for his cat. Did you see this? There he is with the cat tank done with cardboard, which I thought was very inventive. And there was this guy who got so bored he just started playing Uno with a rooster. He just thought, you know, what does it matter anymore? I'm at stay at home. And then I thought this was inventive, needs to make it into the Nelson Atkins. This is somebody who took a can of Pringles and made the most elaborate Pringle art possible. And I just think, wow, like that is impressive. Now here's the thing, that just tells me people are bored. But I also think that there were people that were depressed. I also think that there were people who used this as an opportunity to go introspective. I have a friend who has a mother who's 85, and he looked at me and he said, my mom has terrible health conditions. We're trying to figure out, you know, should we do surgery, should we not? All these really hard, life-altering questions that have to be asked. And he just said, but Jake, like at 85, with this many health conditions, what is the quality of her life if she can't get out and do things? And this thing goes on for a year or 2 or 3. In other words, I think what he was asking is life worth living? And I think on some level, and this is kind of my prayer for all of you, that God would turn our hearts inward enough to ask the questions that really need to be asked of each and every one of us. Like, what really matters? Is life really worth living when everything else is taken away? When everything's stripped to the side and you don't have the career you thought you were gonna have, and you don't have the friends and family access that you thought you were gonna have, and you can't go all the places that you've always wanted to go, when all those things are taken away and all those limiters come to the surface, you start asking the question like, what is life? And maybe you get a little overly philosophical in your journal, but you do so because you're asking some deep and sincere questions about what really matters. And I actually think in this moment, the author Dallas Willard helps us with this. He says it this way, he says, who are we humans? What are we supposed to do? Surely life is more than just surviving or mastering nature and other human beings. Why are we here? The inability to answer such questions is one of the most striking and troublesome quandaries of being a human. Questions like these usually do not seize us so long as we are immersed in the life of a strong family, tribe, nation, or other social unit. In such groups, we feel sure of who we are and what we are to do. At least we think we're sure. But these ties can be broken by education, by social disruption, or I dare say a pandemic, by emotional alienation, and by a myriad of other reasons today. And then the individual human being finds that it is no longer enough to know that he or she is a Smith or a Jones, a lawyer or an engineer, a Hopi or a Southerner, a German or a Briton. And the questions begin inside. What is the purpose of our existence? How should we view ourselves as living beings? Now, the reason why I'm guessing that a lot more of us, if we're wise, are gonna turn inward and start asking these questions instead of constantly trying to medicate ourselves on streaming services. A new one came out, Peacock, this week. I can't believe we need more, but apparently we need more streaming services at this point to medicate ourselves from the quarantine that we're facing. I'm not saying those things are bad in themselves, but I hope that you can break from some of that to actually ask some of the deeper questions of life. And I don't want to get too existential on you, but at the same time I do, because I think it's important that we all take the time to do that deep work on the inside. Here's why I think it's going on. Because we as pastors know that people are more likely to lean in to spiritual things when they're in times of tension or in times of transition, when you're in times of stress or when you're in times of change. People who get married then start asking the question in premarital counseling, are we gonna go to church or not? They start asking questions about faith in God and what do you believe and what do I believe? And those are deep and important questions. When you have a child, you start asking the question, how are we gonna raise this child? Is this child gonna be raised in the way of God? Who is God? What is God? Am I a Christian? I have no idea. We start asking questions in the middle of a divorce where we've got stress and tension and life change, when we move to a new city, when we start a new job, when you've got financial pressure. Anytime we're in the middle, or a pandemic, when we're in times of stress, or when everything goes awry like our plans for 2020, we start asking deeper questions, meaningful questions about our lives. And those are the deep and meaningful questions that I think the Bible is filled with answering for all of us today. Even in church, over the last 4 months, I've been asking questions about what is church? Is the church online now? Is the church in person? What kind of church attendee do I want to be? What kind of pastor do I want to be? We've asked these questions before, and I've had people email me and go, Jake, I don't know if the church is going to exist after this. Pastor Kyle was so good to deal with that a little bit. God is not surprised by any of this. We've had 1,900 years of pandemics in every culture. Like whether you're in Africa or Asia or North America, God is not surprised by any of this stuff. Most of us are just like, we're teenagers. We think we know everything. We don't know everything. And we get really emotional about some of it instead of remembering God is just not surprised by any of this stuff. So instead, I look back and I go, well, what do I want to be? Well, on one hand, I've learned over the last 4 months, like it's very, very easy to slip in to kind of watching church online, but then kind of also surfing Facebook or making breakfast or other things, which I know has happened. But we do so in a sense of realization that we could be sitting in a church for 20, 30 years, even in a chair like this, and never really allow any of it to impact us. We get 20, 30 years down the line, we don't look anything more like Jesus. We've just consumed a lot of church services. Nobody wants to live like that. That sounds meaningless. On the same token, we see people who seem to do incredible things for other people, for God. They serve others like crazy, but they have no depth and substance. They're running around like chickens with their heads cut off, just trying to produce things all the time, and nobody wants to do that either. So instead, what we realize when we start talking about a meaningful life is that we want to first abide, meaning we want something of substance from within, something that really matters to fill our soul. And then secondly, we want to abound. We want to do things that make a profound impact on the world today. Everybody wants to do that. We want to abide in something that means something, and we want to abound. But really, the bigger question we should probably be asking is the question of what it is that we're tying ourselves to that's helping us to abide and abound. And this is where Jesus comes in. We're gonna be looking at a particular text from the life of Jesus today, found in John chapter 15. And it's an important text because it's happening the day before Jesus would go to the cross. So this is the Last Supper. If you've seen that painting before with the 12 disciples and Jesus is there, this is the night of the Last Supper. The Last Supper has happened. Judas has left the table, and Jesus is still there with the 11 disciples. And he's talking to them about what it really means to follow after him. And in the middle of that conversation that he's having with them, we find John chapter 15, and that's our text today. In John chapter 15, Jesus starts talking about living this rich life of meaning that's tied to him. And this is how it reads in the first 10 verses. In John chapter 15, verses 1 through 10, it reads, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it may be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me, as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. This is the word of the Lord. So he's there on Thursday night and he shares this illustration of a vineyard. Now, even in our country, we value vineyards enough to the tune of an industry of $61 billion. Some of you guys spent too much time with vineyards during quarantine, if you know what I mean. The idea of a vineyard is something that was central to the nation of Israel. It was their prized possession. Nation of Israel saw the vineyard as being something that was not only fruitful, but also something of sustenance to them. And so it's not surprising that the Old Testament prophets would often refer to a vineyard as being part of the illustration to make a larger point about God or about his people. And often what you find in the Old Testament is that the nation of Israel was seen as the vine, and out of that vine was a fruitfulness that bore people, the Israelites, the people of God. But most of the time in the Old Testament, the vineyard was seen as negative. It wasn't seen as positive. You can go to Psalm 80 or you can go to Isaiah 5. There are 4 or 5 passages in the Old Testament. And every time it seems to point to a vineyard that has turned its back on God and is now withering away and dying. So what Jesus says is he doesn't say, I am the vine. He starts out in John chapter 15, verse 1 by saying, I am the true vine, the true vine. That means that there's multiple vines that you can tie yourself to. And every one of us learned this in high school. We all learned that tying yourself to people will produce a fruit in your life. This is not hard to understand. You go into a work environment, you adapt that work culture, and then you start producing that fruit. Whenever we tie ourselves to something, we start to produce a fruit within. So the question is, are you tied to the right fruit or are you tied to the wrong fruit, or tied to the right vine or the wrong vine? Well, you just have to look at the fruit that's coming out of your life. And here's what Jesus is trying to say. He's saying if you want to produce the sort of fruit and the good fruit that will remain from walking out a life with me, then you've got to tie yourself to me. You've got to be willing to abide with me, to know me, to live in a life that exhibits me. How do you live this sort of life? Well, John chapter 15 actually lays it out for us. And here's what Jesus says. He says, the first thing that's gonna happen is pruning's gonna come, but pruning leads to growth. Now, we don't love the idea of pruning in our culture because pruning always feels like going backward and nobody wants to go backward. And so we've lived for the last 6 months pruning back our lifestyles, pruning back all the things that we can do. There's a big difference between purging and pruning. Purging is what you do in spring cleaning. You enjoy purging things out of your life that you don't really want anyway. But pruning usually hurts. Pruning hurts because it usually involves saying no to something that you really like, but you know is probably not good for you. The pruning is absolutely necessary, Jesus says, for producing a fruitfulness out of your life. Being able to say no to some good things in order for something greater to take root in your life. And yet for many of us, this is just incredibly difficult. But here's the difference. Look at what it says in verse 2. It says he cuts off every branch in him that does not bear fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes. In other words, everybody gets cut. Some people are allowed to grow within the vine to a certain point, but if they do not produce fruit at a certain moment in time out of the grace of God, they're cut out entirely. And so it's not like you're not gonna go through valleys or times of cutting back. It's just whether or not that's gonna be a pruning or a complete cutting out. The bigger question is, are you becoming fruitful? Everybody knows that if you want a plant to grow and to bear as much fruit as possible, you have to prune it. You have to prune it. And the goal of God is not that you become the biggest branch on the vine. The goal is that you become the most fruitful. And so what does fruitfulness look like? Well, actually, we already know because the Bible tells us what the fruit of God's Spirit looks like. It's things like love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness. So here's the thing. If you want to know if whether or not you're really tied into the right vine, and you can go back and start asking the question, is love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness flowing out of my life? And if you're not sure, check your social media account. What's been coming out of it the last week or the last month? Is it love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness? If you really want to do the hard introspective work, then ask somebody that you've been quarantined with or spent a lot of time with. Hey, so like, is there like a lot of love coming out of my conversation with you right now? A lot of joy, a lot of peace, patience? How's the patience conversation going? And you start to realize, maybe I'm tied to Jesus some of the time, but maybe I find myself ungrafting and grafting to something completely different. Maybe it's Project Self, what I can get out of this. Most of what I'm seeing from society, which is a natural reaction in a time of difficulty, is a sense of self-preservation and greed. A question of like, well, am I gonna be okay? And is my family gonna be okay? And we need to like build a moat around our house and like, put up the bars in order to protect everything that we have. Self-preservation is really not the way of love and peace and patience. It's more around the fears and the anxieties that I think Jesus came to deliver us of. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't be wise. I'm not saying that we shouldn't step back and do some assessment on where we go and what we do. Let's be wise. But let's also not live in a place of fear and anxiety every day. So this is what he's delivered us from. This is what the fruit should look like that comes out of our life, and it starts with purging. What does purging look like? It starts with pruning. What does pruning look like? Well, sometimes you prune a relationship because you know that relationship isn't fruitful in your life. You know it's actually holding you back from living that sort of character. Sometimes you prune back a possession. You prune back something that you have because you know it started to be really good, but now it's become the most important thing in your life. And you know what we call those? Idols. It's something you serve. It's something you worship. It's something you celebrate. You give all of your money to it. You give all of your time to it. You think about it all the time. It can be a person. It can be a thing. It could be a video game. It could be a streaming service. It could be anything that just so captures your heart that you just give all of your life to it. Or maybe it's just a form of entertainment that you know is just downright not the way of Jesus. It doesn't reflect who he is. It doesn't reflect any of the fruit of his spirit that you're trying to seize in your own life, that you may live the meaningful life that you know deep down you want to live, even though that temporary filling up feels so good. A willingness to be able to take a step back and to live a disciplined life, to live a life that's in agreement and to say, I know that sometimes things are hard, but I trust that the sustenance and the fruit that's going to flow through my life is something that God is doing. I'm just not doing it on my own. He says, so I want you to understand pruning comes first. I want you to understand that sometimes you're gonna have to pick up your cross, whatever that is, and follow me, as Matthew 16:24 says. Just pick it up and come hard after me. But then he says, I want you to take it a step further. I don't just want to be a God who prunes you. I want you to remain in me. I want you to take the time to be with me. Jesus challenges his disciples on the night that he's betrayed to follow and remain in him. You know what none of them do? None of them remain in him. They all start running as soon as Jesus is arrested. Peter then denies him 3 times. Like, this is the essence of what Jesus is talking about. But for all of us today, look what he says, remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. True fruitfulness is a byproduct of spending longevity with God. I have a 12-year-old and a 7-year-old. In the spring, they said, this year, Dad, we really want to do a garden. I go, guess what? Dad's got time. Let's do a garden. So we build one of these little box gardens, and I really enjoyed helping them get it set up. And then they've been really diligent and done a really good job with it themselves. But one of the first things we did was we grabbed the pack of seeds. And he said, Dad, I want to grow zucchini and onions and lettuce. Mom loves salad, so let's grow all types of lettuce. Okay, great. So we go to the back of the pack, and if you've never grown a garden before, you may not know this, but we are in Kansas. So how many of you are farmers or you grew up on a farm? You get it. There's what is called the growing season. Sometimes the growing season's 30 days, 45 days, 60 days. Sometimes you can get 2 growing seasons out of one summer. And it tells you how long it's gonna take for something to not only germinate, but produce the thing that you want, the lettuce that's gonna be served on your table. So we've been enjoying now zucchini and lettuce around the table. It's been really great. Now they're thinking about what they wanna plant again. And we're all aware of this. I mean, if you've had a child, then you know pregnancy is kind of like that. It's a growing season. We're aware, like if you go through a degree program, there is a season of maturation before you're finally ready to graduate. And if you cut any of those things short, then you never experience the sustenance that comes from living out the fullness of that growing season until we get into church. And then in church we go, well, God, if you don't do it in my life today, you must not be real. And God, if you don't change me overnight, then you must not care. And we forget that sometimes the true fruit of God's Spirit comes from being a part of an extended growing season where something deep and filled with a root structure that will remain has to be developed within you. And it's not so much about having these high and mighty experiences with God, though occasionally that may happen. These epiphany moments where everything changes. Instead, what often happens with our formation is it's just simply consistency and faithfulness day by day by day. And it's almost as though God looks at us and goes, 45-day growing season on that one before the fruitfulness really comes. 60-day growing season on that one until the fruitfulness really comes. And something begins to not only germinate and birth within us, but it needs to enter into the fullness where we start looking and acting and living in a very different way that looks a whole lot like Jesus. He says, remain in me. If you're a potted plant, meaning you're here today and gone tomorrow, here today and gone tomorrow, you're never going to see the result. I don't care if you're in the gym or you're trying to eat healthy or you're trying to live any level of discipline in any area of your life. It's not going to happen. But it is those who understand that it's about planting and rooting yourself, and sometimes having a good week and sometimes having a bad week, but being rooted and structured, whether there's a pandemic or whether you just won the lottery. It doesn't matter what's going on. You remain resolute in what you know will bring the sustenance to your life, the meaning to your life that's greater than anything else that you're searching for, because you start connecting to your Creator who made you and formed you and offers you life eternal. It's why we can promise and live in that. So if you feel restless right now, I'm gonna tell you what I tell my kids to go do. Take a nap, take a rest, chill out. If you're restless right now, oh God, you gotta do it, just go rest. Adults, if I ask any adult in here who wants nap time, everybody says yes, am I right? Yep, there it is. Adults, yep, nap time, good. Kids, nap time, no. It's the same thing on a spiritual level. You start talking to spiritually mature Christians and they start going, oh yeah, man, nap time. I'm just gonna go rest in Jesus. You talk to kids, spiritual teenagers, they fight it all day long. They're like, man, why do I have to take a rest? I just wanna go produce and I wanna go do things and I'm gonna miss out on everything. But those who have walked this out for a while just know sometimes you just need to rest. You're in the middle of a growing season. It's just time to rest. It's time to remain. It's time to just be in a rooted system where you don't worry about how much you can achieve. As we say often in our church, those in their 20s are worried about how much they're gonna achieve in this life. Those in their 30s are always consumed with security. And those in their 40s tend to be consumed with identity. And it kind of cyclically moves over and over and over and over throughout the course of our lives, depending on the season that we're in. Don't worry about that stuff. Just rest, just remain. And then what does John 15 say we're to remain in? Remain in my love. That's what he says. Remain in my love. Receive it. Receive my love. Just as John 15:9 says, he says, I've received my Father's love. I want you to receive my love. What is the nutrition that's rolling out of the vine and into the branch of our lives? It's his love. The Apostle Paul says this, he says in 1 Corinthians 13, we've all heard it in weddings. We talked about it a couple weeks ago. Love is patient, love is kind, love is all this. He's essentially saying, look, you can prophesy, meaning you can hear from God. You can have all of these gifts, talents, and abilities. You can go around changing the world, but if you do not have love, you have nothing. The sustenance of your life, the sustenance of the way in which you act during a pandemic is one of love and grace and mercy to others. Look, I know where I'm going. I'm confident of that. I know that my future is secure and everything that I've ever needed has already been given to me in Jesus. That's how we as Christians are meant to live. So if that is true, then the deepest desire of my heart is not to fight for things in the middle of one season or another, but rather to do everything in my power to be a bridge builder for those who have not yet received, that they may know the same hope and love and truth in Jesus that I've received. And if my life becomes anything else, then I dare say I'm not following in the way of Jesus, who was so willing to do that, he went to a cross. I think my responsibility is to simply look back at others and meet them where they're at, the way that Jesus met me where I was at, and the way that he's met you where you were at, if you're a follower of him in the room or online. It's about us instead stepping up and exuding the love of Jesus and not being a bridge divider, but being a bridge builder for those to be able to cross to the other side. I watch sometimes how we respond to certain things and I go, oh my gosh, I don't think we're bridge building in this moment as the Church of Jesus. I think we're seeking to create it more difficult than it needs to be for people to experience his love and his grace. And yet the love and the grace of God has got to be at the center. I don't care if it's a pandemic. I don't care if it's the height of American fruitfulness, whatever it looks like. I don't care. My desire above all else is not just that you have the confidence to know where you're going when you die, but that you experience the full fruitfulness that this life has to offer. And it doesn't come from having more privileges, rights, and abilities. It comes from knowing him and abiding in him. So that's my hope for you. It means that you can go through a war, a famine, disease. You can go through anything and know that the life that's being inputted into you is greater than any circumstance you face. It's the capacity to be resolute in the midst of everything else that's going on. And the good news for you and I today is the same good news that was there for the disciples in John 15. His love is available for you because of the grace that he extends to you, meaning it doesn't mean that you earned it. It doesn't mean you deserve it. It doesn't mean that any of these things are driven by what you've done. It's all because of what he's done for you. The Bible says that God, in his great infinite wisdom, looked at man, realizing that in ourselves, we don't have the capacity to be able to do anything good enough to ever reach God. So he sends Jesus as the Savior of the world to offer us life in him. Some said he lied, some said he wasn't real, some said this, but we know that historically, he was not only a man, but a man who then lived, as we can tell, a sinless life, died a death that you and I couldn't die, paid the price for our sin, and offers us grace and mercy and life. To follow in his way isn't just about trying to live a legalistic life. It's the pursuit of living life to the fullest and understanding that as he takes root in our hearts, then something dramatically shifts inside of us and we are never the same. And the beauty of that promise that we have in him is that it isn't available to the people who grew up in church or those who are most spiritual or those who look most morally right standing, but it's available for all of us. The Bible says it simply comes down to whether or not you're willing to surrender your life and to say, God, I've made potentially a mess out of my life. Maybe it's been pretty good so far. Maybe it's been horrible so far. But either way, I know that there is something that's coming between you and I because I'm not perfect. And today, I choose the way of surrender. The way to say, God, would you forgive me? Would you transform me? Would you set me free? Not because of what I've done, but because of the grace that you offer me. The fullness of God's grace is always experienced in abiding in him. And that's our value for today. Abiding comes to us when we experience the grace of God. And the grace of God comes to us when we abide in him. This connection offers us the life that we're looking for. And I pray that you might receive it today. And so if you're watching online or you're in the room and you're just spiritually searching, I would say to you that you will never, ever come to the place that you're looking for until you come to the point of surrender and the end of yourself. And I want to give you the opportunity to pray a simple prayer, a confession, if you will, to God, and to say, God, would you forgive me? I want Jesus to come and lead me, guide me, direct me. I surrender. I'm at the end of myself, and I'm willing to move forward in this new life as the love of God flows through me into the lives of others. So I want to help you to say that prayer. So we're going to pray together, and then our team's going to lead us to respond. Let's take time to pray now as we do that introspective work that we've been talking about today. Let's pray.
Thank you for listening. For more information, go to visithopechapel.com.